Marcus Hale had not moved into Cedar Ridge Estates to make enemies. After 22 years in the military and a final decade of private security consulting, he wanted the one thing that had always seemed just out of reach: quiet. He wanted a place where the loudest sound at sunrise would be sprinklers clicking across trimmed lawns, where evenings meant grilling dinner on the patio instead of scanning exits in crowded cities. Most of all, he wanted stability for his 16-year-old daughter, Emma, who had spent half her childhood changing schools every few years. Cedar Ridge looked perfect on paper. The gated neighborhood sat on the edge of town, tucked behind stone walls lined with rose bushes and decorative lanterns. Streets curved around a small lake, sidewalks were spotless, and nearly every home had some version of the same polished look: neutral paint, manicured hedges, and mailboxes that appeared measured by laser. Real estate listings called it prestigious. The moving truck driver called it the kind of place where people complain if your grass grows emotionally. Marcus should have taken that as a warning. Still, on move-in day, he focused on the positives. Emma smiled for the first time in weeks when she saw the upstairs bedroom with a window overlooking the trees. Their golden retriever, Atlas, sprinted through the backyard like he'd discovered paradise. A retired couple from across the street brought over lemonade and banana bread. Another neighbor introduced himself and offered Marcus the number of a reliable plumber. For the first 48 hours, it felt like they had made the right decision. Then Linda Carver arrived. She did not knock so much as announce herself through the front door with 3 sharp raps delivered in perfect rhythm. Marcus opened it to find a woman in her late 50s wearing white slacks, oversized sunglasses, and the expression of someone constantly disappointed by the world. Behind her stood 2 other women carrying clipboards. "Mr. Hale," she said, though she hadn't asked his name, "I'm Linda Carver, president of the Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association." Marcus nodded once. "Nice to meet you." She looked past him into the house. "We prefer residents schedule interior renovations through the architectural committee before moving furniture." "We're unpacking boxes," Marcus said. "Yes." Linda removed her sunglasses slowly, as if unveiling authority itself. "And those boxes can scratch hardwood. Hardwood debris creates curbside waste. Waste attracts raccoons." Marcus waited. One of the clipboard women wrote something down. Linda extended a folder thick enough to stop a bullet. "These are community guidelines. Landscaping standards, holiday decoration schedules, approved paint palettes, pet relief zones, driveway etiquette, guest parking protocols, and our monthly attendance expectations." Attendance expectations. "Our HOA meetings," she said, "mandatory for responsible homeowners." Marcus glanced at the folder. "I'll review it." She didn't let go. "There is also a welcome inspection," Linda continued. "We like to identify noncompliance early." Marcus gently took the folder from her hand. "We just got here." "Exactly why it's efficient now." Emma appeared in the hallway carrying a lamp. Linda's eyes narrowed immediately. "Is that going in the front-facing room?" Emma looked at Marcus. Maybe. No personal items visible from street-facing windows before final aesthetic review," Linda said. Marcus's jaw tightened by a fraction. "That won't be necessary." The clipboard women stopped writing and looked up. Linda smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Mr. Hale, cooperation keeps Cedar Ridge beautiful." "Boundaries do too." For the first time, her expression cracked. She adjusted her sunglasses and stepped back. "I'll expect you at Thursday's board meeting, 7 p.m. sharp." "I won't be there." That landed harder than shouting would have. Linda blinked once. "Excuse me. I have family plans." "It's the second Thursday. Meetings are always the second Thursday." Marcus nodded. "Then I guess I'll miss this one." He closed the door politely. Through the side lights, he could still see her standing motionless on the porch. Emma peeked around the corner. "Did we just get put on some kind of list?" Marcus exhaled. "Probably." "Should I be worried?" "No." But as he looked through the front window, he saw Linda slowly turn toward the street and speak to the 2 women beside her. All 3 glanced back at the house before walking away. That evening, Marcus met more neighbors while rolling trash bins to the curb. Their friendliness was real, but something else was there too: hesitation. A man watering his lawn introduced himself as Greg, then lowered his voice. "You handled Linda better than most." "I just said no." Greg gave a dry laugh. "Around here, that counts as aggression." Before Marcus could ask what that meant, Greg's garage door suddenly opened halfway across the street. Linda stood inside her own garage, watching. Greg immediately raised his voice. "Anyway, great weather we're having." He wheeled his hose inside and disappeared. Marcus noticed 3 separate security cameras pointed toward the road from Linda's property. Later that night, while unpacking kitchen supplies, Emma found the HOA folder on the counter and flipped through it. "Dad, there's a section on mailbox shades." "Of course there is. There are 4 approved beige options. Luxury living." She laughed, then frowned. "Do you think she's serious?" Marcus took the folder, skimmed several pages, and set it aside. "People like that are always serious." The next morning, he woke before sunrise and went for a run through the neighborhood. Cedar Ridge was peaceful in the early light, birds in the trees, sprinklers ticking, mist rising from the lake. Then he rounded the corner toward his house and stopped. Across the mouth of his driveway stood 2 bright orange construction barriers chained together with reflective tape. A laminated sign hung from the center. "Temporary access restricted by HOA order." Marcus stared at it for a long moment. No construction crews, no broken pavement, no utility trucks. Just an empty street, a blocked driveway, and Linda Carver standing on her porch 50 yards away with a coffee mug in hand. Even from that distance, he could tell she was smiling. Marcus stood at the edge of the driveway, sweat cooling on his skin from the run, and studied the barriers like they were part of a training exercise. Bright orange plastic, fresh reflective tape, metal chain threaded through the handles and secured with a heavy padlock. Whoever set them there had done it recently. The wheels still carried damp dirt from the street. He looked down at the laminated sign again. "Temporary access restricted by HOA order." No citation number, no explanation, no date. Just authority without detail. Across the street, curtains shifted in 2 windows. A garage door cracked open 3 inches, then stopped. Neighbors were watching, but carefully. Marcus turned toward Linda's house. She was still on her porch in a pressed robe, one hand wrapped around a coffee mug, the other resting on the railing like a queen observing a minor inconvenience. He crossed the street at an easy pace. "Morning," he said. Linda took a slow sip. "Good morning, Mr. Hale." "My driveway is blocked." "Yes. Why?" She tilted her head. "Pending compliance review." "With what?" "Several matters. We moved in 3 days ago." Exactly why prompt correction is important. Marcus waited. Silence often made people reveal more than questions did. Linda mistook the pause for uncertainty. "You declined a welcome inspection," she said. "You failed to attend the board meeting. Your mailbox color is unverified. Your front window displays non-approved decor, and your dog relieved itself near a shared hedge. Atlas used our yard." She shrugged. From certain angles, property lines can be subjective. Marcus almost smiled. "How long does this temporary restriction last?" "That depends on your cooperation." There it was, the real reason. He nodded once, understood. Then he turned and walked back across the street. Linda's smile faded slightly, as if she had expected anger and been disappointed by professionalism. Inside the house, Emma was standing by the front window in socks, holding a cereal bowl. "Please tell me that's fake." "It's real." "You're kidding." "Nope." She looked from the barriers to Linda's porch. "Can she do that?" "Probably not." "Then why is she doing it?" "Because no one stopped her before." Emma set the bowl down. "What are you going to do?" Marcus grabbed his keys from the counter. "Take you to school." "How teleportation?" He opened the garage side door, ducked under the barrier chain, and walked to the SUV trapped in the driveway. A moment later, he backed it carefully onto the lawn, angled across the side yard, and rolled onto the street through an open section near the mailbox. Emma stared. That seems illegal. It's grass. It was grass. They drove to school in silence for a minute before Emma glanced over. You're weirdly calm. I'm deciding whether this is stupidity or strategy. And I'm leaning stupidity. When he returned, the barriers had been repositioned tighter, now extending several feet into the lawn as if to punish creativity. Marcus parked legally along the curb down the block. Then he took out his phone and photographed everything. Wide shot of driveway. Close-up of lock. Sign. Barrier placement crossing property line. Linda watching from porch again. He took his time. By noon, the first violation notice arrived taped to his front door. Notice of noncompliance, tire tracks on front lawn, fine $75. At 2:15 p.m. a second notice. Improper street parking orientation, fine $50. At 4:40 p.m. a third. Visible garbage can lid ajar, fine $25. The garbage cans were in the garage. Emma came home, read the notices, and burst out laughing. She's speedrunning villain mode. Marcus sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad, writing times and descriptions in neat block letters. Keep every paper, he said. Are we building a scrapbook? Something like that. That evening, while unloading groceries from the curb, an older woman from 2 houses down approached cautiously with a casserole dish covered in foil. I'm Nancy, she said quietly. Welcome to Cedar Ridge. Thank you. She glanced toward Linda's house before lowering her voice. She did this to the Millers over wind chimes, blocked their contractor for 2 weeks. Marcus took the dish. Why didn't anyone report it? Nancy gave him a tired look. To who? Before he could answer, Linda's voice rang across the street. Nancy, soliciting sympathy violates community harmony standards. Nancy flinched like she'd heard that tone before. I should go, she whispered, hurrying away. Marcus watched her leave, then looked at Linda. She raised her mug in a mocking toast. The next morning brought sprinklers. At precisely 6:10 a.m., the irrigation heads near the barriers activated at full pressure, soaking the sidewalk, driveway entrance, and anyone trying to pass. Marcus stepped through anyway on his walk to the parked SUV. Cold water drenched his jeans. Across the street, Linda pretended to read a magazine. At 6:11, Marcus photographed the sprinkler heads. At 6:12, he photographed the timer box mounted openly beside her garage. At 6:13, he waved politely. By day 5, the whole neighborhood knew. Some residents avoided eye contact, others offered sympathetic nods from a distance. A few seemed entertained, as if HOA tyranny had finally found a worthy opponent. What unsettled Linda most was that Marcus never complained publicly. He still jogged each morning. Still waved to neighbors. Still helped Greg lift drywall into his garage. Still repaired a loose mailbox hinge for Nancy without being asked. No ranting, no shouting, no threats. Only notes, photos, calm. That afternoon, Linda marched over with 2 clipboard women behind her. We need to discuss your attitude, she announced. Marcus was trimming a hedge with hand shears. My attitude. Your passive resistance is creating tension. He set the shears down carefully. You blocked my driveway. You forced administrative action. You invented administrative action. One clipboard woman coughed to hide a laugh. Linda spun toward her, then back to Marcus. If you apologize and attend Thursday's meeting, I may consider reducing fines. Marcus picked up the shears again. No. Her cheeks reddened. Excuse me. No. Single syllable, calm, final. She stepped closer. You think you can outlast me? Marcus clipped another branch. I know I can. For a moment, even the clipboard women looked nervous. Linda turned sharply and stormed away, heels stabbing the pavement. That night, after dinner, Emma found him at the table adding another page to the legal pad. How many notes is that now? 32 entries. She's completely obsessed. Marcus nodded. People who need control usually are. Emma leaned on the chair beside him. So what's the plan? He capped the pen and looked toward the dark window where the barriers reflected porch light like warning beacons. Right now. He slid the pad into a folder. We let her keep talking. By the third week, the barriers had become part of Cedar Ridge's landscape. Delivery drivers slowed automatically at Marcus Hale's house, confused by the bright orange blockade and the perfectly normal driveway behind it. Dog walkers crossed the street to stare. Children riding bikes treated it like a landmark. Race you to the prison driveway. Parents usually shushed them before they got too close. Marcus never reacted. Every morning he parked down the block, walked home with coffee in hand, and stepped around the barriers like they were decorative shrubs. Every evening he carried groceries, tool bags, or whatever else he needed with the same steady pace. If it rained, he got wet. If the sprinklers activated, he got wet twice. Linda hated that most of all. She wanted outrage, she wanted scenes, she wanted the satisfaction of telling neighbors she had managed a difficult resident. Instead, Marcus treated her campaign like background noise. So she escalated. On day 18, a violation notice appeared accusing him of excessive pedestrian wear on his own lawn. Fine, $100. On day 19, another claimed his porch light temperature was too cool-toned for community ambience. Fine, $50. On day 20, he was warned that Atlas, the golden retriever, had displayed unauthorized barking after quiet hours. Atlas had spent that entire night asleep under Emma's desk. Emma read the notice and nearly choked laughing. Unauthorized barking? What is authorized barking? Marcus took the paper, filed it in the growing folder, and said, probably whatever Linda does at meetings. Even Emma laughed harder at that. But behind the humor, the pressure was real. School project boards had to be carried from curbside parking to the house. Heavy grocery runs turned into two-trip hikes. Rainstorms made the grass slick. Once, Emma slipped while dragging a duffel bag and landed hard enough to bruise her elbow. Marcus helped her up immediately. You okay? Yeah, she said, wincing, then she looked at the barriers. No, actually. That was the first time he saw anger in her eyes about any of this. He crouched beside her. We're close. To what? To people showing who they are. Across the street, Linda was pretending to prune roses while very obviously watching. That weekend, the first crack in Cedar Ridge's silence appeared. Mrs. Dalton, the elderly widow from 2 houses over, insisted on helping Emma carry a stack of poster boards for school. Nonsense, she said. I raised 3 sons. I can handle cardboard. Halfway across the wet lawn, she slipped. Marcus reached her before she hit the ground fully, catching most of her weight, but she still twisted her ankle badly enough to cry out. Doors opened all along the street. Neighbors emerged. Greg came running first. Nancy followed with ice packs. A teenager from the corner house brought a chair. Within minutes, 6 people were gathered in Marcus's front yard, all staring at the barriers as Mrs. Dalton sat grimacing with her shoe off. Linda remained on her porch. It's unfortunate, she called out, when residents ignore designated pathways. Greg turned so sharply Marcus thought he might explode. There isn't a designated pathway, Greg snapped. You blocked it. Linda lifted one shoulder. Temporary access adjustments are legal under community authority. Show us where, Nancy said. Linda smiled thinly. Board matters are confidential. That line had worked for years. This time no one moved. Marcus said nothing. He simply helped Mrs. Dalton into Greg's car so he could drive her to urgent care. The neighborhood watched Linda watch them. By Monday, whispers had become conversations. At mailboxes, in driveways, beside trash bins, people spoke in low voices about old fines, strange fees, contractor delays, and rules that seemed to apply only when Linda wanted them to. Someone mentioned the Millers had moved because of nonstop citations. Another neighbor admitted Linda once threatened to tow a nurse's car for parking overnight during double shifts. A landscaper quietly told Greg he'd been instructed never to work for problem homes. Years of scattered resentment were finding each other. Linda sensed it, so she called an emergency HOA meeting. The clubhouse filled faster than usual that Thursday night. Marcus didn't attend, but Emma insisted on going with Nancy for sociological research. She came home 90 minutes later looking energized. "Well," Marcus asked. Emma dropped into a chair. "She's spiraling." "Details." She opened by saying certain residents were spreading misinformation. Then she implied you were under investigation. "For what?" She didn't say, just dramatic pause stuff. Marcus nodded, predictable. Then Greg asked who authorized the barriers, Emma continued. She said legal counsel advised confidentiality. "We don't have legal counsel," Nancy called from the doorway behind her, entering with a pie dish she had forgotten to reclaim 2 weeks earlier. "She means her cousin Todd, who once lost a traffic court case." Emma grinned, then Mrs. Dalton came in wearing an ankle brace. "That changed the room," Nancy said. Marcus leaned back. "How so?" "People got brave." According to both of them, questions started coming from every side. Why were reserve funds lower this year? Why were some homes fined for paint while others were? Why did Linda's cousin receive repeated maintenance contracts? Why had no one seen votes recorded for several recent decisions? Linda banged a gavel hard enough to crack the handle. Meeting adjourned. No answers given. Marcus listened without visible emotion, then asked only one question. "Did anyone record it?" Emma smiled slowly. 3 people. For the first time since the barriers appeared, Marcus let himself show satisfaction. The next afternoon, while he repaired a teenager's bicycle chain in his driveway-adjacent lawn, a white envelope slid under his front door. No stamp, no name. Inside was a stack of copied documents. HOA expense summaries. Vendor invoices. Payment approvals. Repeated charges labeled temporary traffic management equipment. The amounts increased every week. Vendor name, Carver Community Services LLC. Marcus looked at the papers for a long moment. Then he checked the address listed beneath the company name. It matched Linda's home. Emma found him at the table staring at the pages. Good news face or bad news face? He handed her the top invoice. She read it once, then twice. "She's billing the HOA to harass you." "Looks that way." "That's cartoon-level evil." Marcus finally smiled. "No," he said, placing the documents into the folder beside the legal pad. "It's better than that." "Better?" "It's sloppy." Outside, the barriers glowed orange in the setting sun. Inside, for the first time in 3 weeks, Linda Carver had made a mistake Marcus could use. Day 47 began with theater. Marcus noticed it before sunrise. 2 fresh potted plants had been placed near the barriers, one on each side, as if the blockade were now a decorative feature of Cedar Ridge. A new laminated sign hung from the chain in bold black letters. Community Access Enforcement Zone. No unauthorized vehicles. He stared at it for a moment, then took 3 photos from different angles. Inside, Emma looked over his shoulder and groaned. She rebranded the driveway prison. "She's committing to the bit," Marcus said. "She needs hobbies." By 8:30, activity started building outside. A tow truck rolled slowly into the neighborhood and parked directly across from Marcus's house. The driver, a heavy-set man in mirrored sunglasses, remained in the cab checking something on his phone. 5 minutes later, Linda emerged from her house wearing a navy blazer, pearls, and the expression of someone preparing for a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Behind her came 2 HOA board members, Ron Feldman and Denise Pike, both looking uncomfortable enough to be mistaken for hostages. Emma peered through the blinds. "She brought backup." "She brought witnesses," Marcus corrected. Linda crossed the street with crisp, deliberate steps and stopped at the curb beside Marcus's SUV, legally parked where it had been for days. Neighbors began appearing with suspiciously convenient timing. Greg walked out carrying an empty trash bag. Nancy watered flowers that did not need water. Mrs. Dalton sat on her porch with binoculars she made no attempt to hide. Children on bicycles circled slowly at the far end of the street until parents called them back. Linda raised her voice. Mr. Hale, due to repeated parking violations and abandonment concerns, this vehicle is being removed at owner expense. Emma turned. Abandonment concerns, it moved yesterday. Marcus stepped outside, calm as ever, carrying a plain manila folder. The tow driver climbed down, glanced at the SUV, then at Marcus. You the owner? I am. Linda cut in immediately. Do not engage, hook it. The driver hesitated. Ma'am, I need authorization paperwork. Linda held up a clipboard. I am authorization paperwork. Even Denise looked embarrassed. Marcus stopped 3 feet from the tow truck and addressed the driver directly. Before you touch the vehicle, I'd like to ask one question. The man shifted uneasily. Yeah. Did anyone tell you this tow request is tied to an unlawful 47-day private driveway blockade and selective retaliation campaign? Silence dropped across the street. Linda snapped first. That is absurd. Hook the car now. Marcus handed the driver a single sheet from the folder. The man read it. It was a printout of city parking code stating the vehicle was legally parked, current registration visible, and nowhere near abandonment thresholds. He looked at Linda. She smiled too brightly. Irrelevant. HOA supersedes street aesthetics. Ron Feldman muttered, I don't think that's a phrase. Marcus handed the driver a second page. Then a third. Photos of the barriers. Copies of violation notices issued the same day for impossible offenses. Invoices billed to the HOA for traffic management equipment. Vendor name, Carver Community Services LLC. The tow driver slowly removed his sunglasses. You related to Carver Community Services. Linda's face tightened. This is harassment. It's your last name, Nancy called from the flower bed. Several neighbors laughed before quickly pretending not to. Denise stepped backward. Linda, is that your company? It is a management vendor, Linda said sharply. Ron frowned. You told us it was county contracted. I said county compliant. That is not the same thing, Ron replied. Marcus checked his watch. Right on schedule, 2 dark sedans turned into Cedar Ridge and drove directly toward the crowd. They parked nose to tail near the clubhouse entrance. The first person out wore a city code enforcement jacket. The second carried a leather briefcase and introduced herself immediately to anyone listening. Dana Mercer, licensed forensic accountant, representing 12 homeowners of Cedar Ridge Estates. The entire street seemed to inhale at once. Linda recovered enough to point furiously. You cannot just arrive here unannounced. Dana opened a folder. We announced by certified letter 6 days ago. Ron looked at Denise. Did you get a certified letter? Denise looked sick. Linda signs all board mail. The code officer approached the barriers, examined the chain, then the sign. Who installed these? Linda lifted her chin. The association. Permit numbers. No answer. Board vote. Ron said, I never voted on this. Denise added quietly, neither did I. The officer scribbled notes. These obstruct a residential access point without permit or emergency basis. They must be removed immediately. Linda's voice rose half an octave. You have no jurisdiction over community beautification. It's a driveway, the officer said flatly. Greg laughed so hard he had to sit down on his curb. Dana Mercer meanwhile was turning pages. I also need clarification on repeated payments from HOA reserves to Carver Community Services, plus landscaping surcharges, expedited compliance fees, and consulting reimbursements. Linda pointed at Marcus as if discovering the true villain. He manipulated residents. Marcus said nothing. Dana continued, there are also transfers made the same week dues increased. Now neighbors were no longer whispering. They were talking openly, loudly all at once. She fined me for a basketball hoop. She charged me for holiday lights I never put up. She threatened my renter. She said my mailbox leaned aggressively. Mrs. Dalton lifted her binoculars and shouted, my azaleas have never forgiven her. The tow driver climbed back into his truck. I'm out, he said through the open window. Y'all got layers. He drove away to scattered applause. Linda spun toward Ron and Denise. Say something. Ron adjusted his collar. I'd like it noted I asked about the barriers in March. You asked where we bought them, Denise said. That still counts as engagement. The code officer cut the chain with bolt cutters borrowed from Greg's garage. The barriers tipped sideways onto the pavement. For the first time in 47 days, Marcus's driveway stood open. Emma stepped beside her father and stared at the clear concrete like it was a national monument. Can we frame this moment? She asked. Linda looked around for support and found none. The crowd had shifted physically away from her. Dana Mercer closed her folder. Mrs. Carver, I strongly advise you not to delete anything. Linda's expression changed then, not anger, not pride. Fear. Marcus noticed it but showed nothing. He simply took out his phone, photographed the fallen barriers, and placed one final note into the manila folder. The street did not calm down after the barriers fell. If anything, the collapse of the orange blockade acted like a signal flare over Cedar Ridge. Front doors opened. Garage doors rose. Residents who had spent years keeping their heads down stepped into the sunlight with folded notices, unpaid invoices, printed emails, and long-buried frustrations. Linda Carver stood in the center of it all, still clutching her clipboard like it might restore order. It's a misunderstanding, she insisted. Administrative procedures often appear unusual to uninformed homeowners. No, Nancy said, walking straight toward her. What appears unusual is charging me $200 because my wreath was emotionally oversized. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Linda pointed at her. That was seasonal noncompliance. It was a circle with ribbon. Greg held up a yellowing notice of his own. You fined me for pressure washing my driveway on a Tuesday. Noise restrictions. At noon. Lunch hours matter. Even Ron Feldman, who had spent most of the morning trying to become invisible, looked offended by that logic. Dana Mercer, the forensic accountant, moved to the hood of her sedan and began organizing documents into neat stacks. She had the calm efficiency of someone who had seen messy people ruin themselves many times before. Mrs. Carver, she said without looking up, I'll ask once more. Did the board formally approve Carver Community Services as a vendor? Linda straightened. The board approved operational flexibility. Ron immediately raised a hand. I did not approve that phrase. Denise shook her head. Neither did I. Dana made a note. Understood. The city code officer finished photographing the driveway entrance, the chain, the signs, and the barriers now lying uselessly in the gutter. I'll be issuing citations for unauthorized obstruction, unpermitted placement, and misuse of traffic control devices, he said. Linda stared at him. To the association. To the responsible party. That's vague. It won't be on the paperwork. Emma nearly snorted laughing from where she stood beside Marcus. Marcus himself remained quiet near the mailbox, one hand resting on Atlas's collar. The dog seemed delighted by the number of people gathered outside. You're not even enjoying this, are you? Emma asked softly. I'm enjoying the driveway, Marcus replied. She looked at the open concrete and smiled. Fair. Then came the moment no one expected. Mrs. Dalton arrived back from urgent care wearing an ankle brace and carrying a folder thicker than Linda's clipboard. I'd like to speak, she announced. No one objected. She set the folder on the hood of Dana's sedan and opened it. Inside were years of records, COPID violation notices, meeting agendas, handwritten logs, certified mail receipts, and photographs. I started keeping these after she fined my late husband for displaying a memorial flag too close to the rose bed, Mrs. Dalton said. That was 6 years ago. The crowd turned slowly toward Linda. You said it lowered property values, Mrs. Dalton continued. Linda's voice shrank. There were placement concerns. There were grief concerns, Mrs. Dalton snapped. For the first time all morning, applause broke out. Dana accepted the folder carefully. This will be useful. It gets better, Mrs. Dalton said. Page 42 has her threatening to tow a hospice nurse. Several people gasped. Linda spun toward Ron and Denise again. Say something, this board supports me. Ron took a full step backward. I support due process. Denise took 2 steps backward. I support whatever keeps me off television. The emergency petition began as a single sheet of paper Nancy pulled from a recipe binder. Special vote for immediate removal of HOA president. At first it looked almost silly. Then people lined up. One by one neighbors signed. Some with angry strokes. Some with shaking hands. Some smiling for the first time in years. Greg signed so hard the pen snapped. A teenager borrowed another pen and signed for his parents because they're parking. Even residents from side streets started arriving after hearing the commotion. Linda watched the line form and seemed unable to process what she was seeing. These signatures are invalid, she said weakly. Dana glanced over. They are homeowners in good standing. How do you know? I checked while you were yelling. By early afternoon, the petition had more than enough names to trigger an emergency board session under the HOA bylaws Linda herself had helped rewrite. That irony was not lost on anyone. The meeting took place in the clubhouse 2 hours later. Every chair was filled, people stood along the walls, others watched through windows. Marcus sat in the back beside Emma, arms folded, refusing every invitation to move closer. I feel like we should have brought popcorn, Emma whispered. Too loud, he said. Ron called the session to order with a borrowed gavel. Linda attempted a speech about loyalty, sabotage, and outsider influence, while repeatedly gesturing toward Marcus. Then Dana projected financial summaries onto the clubhouse wall. Gasps followed each slide. Duplicated vendor invoices. Reserve funds drained. Selective waivers for allies. Penalty income spikes after personal disputes. Repeated reimbursements for executive wellness lunches. That was one salad, Linda shouted. It was $312, Dana replied. Voting lasted less than 5 minutes. Removal passed by an overwhelming margin. When Ron read the results aloud, the room erupted. Some clapped. Some cheered. One man shouted, "Free the mailboxes." Linda remained seated, rigid and pale. Then, because humiliation sometimes insists on detail, Denise slid a cardboard banker's box across the table. Your personal items from the office. Inside were framed certificates, scented candles, spare nameplates, and a mug reading Neighborhood Boss. Emma had to bury her face in Marcus's shoulder to stop laughing. Linda stood slowly, lifted the box, and scanned the room for sympathy. She found none. As she walked toward the exit, people stepped aside, not respectfully but decisively. At the doorway, she turned toward Marcus. This is because of you. He met her gaze evenly. No, he said, this is because of you. She left without another word. That evening, the sun set over Cedar Ridge with Marcus's driveway finally clear and Linda Carver's former office dark behind clubhouse windows. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt lighter. The first Saturday after Linda Carver's removal, Cedar Ridge woke to an unfamiliar sound. Nothing. No golf cart patrolling at dawn, no megaphone reminders about trash bin angles, no printed notices slapped onto doors before breakfast, no Linda standing at corners with coffee and judgment. Just birds in the trees, sprinklers ticking in the distance, and the occasional garage door opening without fear. People noticed immediately. Some residents stepped outside cautiously, as if expecting Linda to emerge from a hedge and cite them for breathing irregularly. Others seemed almost giddy. Children rode bikes in circles longer than usual. A teenager shot basketballs in his driveway for an hour with no one measuring bounce volume. Greg stood in his front yard holding a rake he clearly had no intention of using. "Feels weird," he called across the street. Marcus, kneeling beside an old pickup truck in his now accessible driveway, looked up. "Quiet usually does." Emma leaned out from under the raised hood. "He means good weird." Greg nodded. "Yeah, that." The truck had belonged to Marcus's brother years earlier and had spent the last decade sleeping under a tarp in storage. Faded blue paint, rust near the wheel wells, interior smelling faintly of dust and gasoline. It was exactly the kind of project Marcus liked: honest, mechanical, fixable. He had promised Emma they would rebuild it once life slowed down. Life apparently had listened. By 10 o'clock, neighbors had begun wandering over one by one under thin excuses. Nancy brought lemonade. Mrs. Dalton brought folding chairs and unsolicited but excellent advice. Greg brought socket wrenches and the confidence of a man who had once watched 3 engine videos online. Even Ron Feldman arrived carrying donuts. Perhaps hopping pastries could erase years of cowardice. Emma accepted them anyway. "You're all circling like raccoons," she said. "We're observing community recovery," Nancy replied. Marcus handed Greg a wrench. "Then recover this alternator bolt." Laughter came easier now. Inside the clubhouse, the newly appointed interim board held its first open meeting. For the first time in anyone's memory, the doors were literally propped open. A handwritten sign read, "Residents welcome, questions encouraged." That alone caused several people to take photos. By afternoon, changes were already underway. Dozens of disputed fines were suspended pending review. Vendor contracts tied to Linda's relatives were frozen. Reserve accounts were being audited. Rules regarding mailbox paint shades were quietly moved into a folder labeled Needs Perspective. Someone suggested dissolving the Aesthetic Harmony Subcommittee. No one knew what it did. No one admitted joining it. Meanwhile, Marcus stayed out of the politics entirely. When Ron approached the driveway holding a clipboard and hopeful smile, Marcus recognized danger immediately. "We'd like you to consider a board position," Ron began. "No. I haven't explained the role." "You don't need to. It would mostly involve oversight, fairness, conflict resolution." "No." Ron sighed. "You answered faster the second time." Marcus tightened a hose clamp. "Experience." Emma didn't even look up from the engine bay. "He said he's had enough politics for one lifetime." Ron glanced at her. "Military." "HOA," she said. Ron left with surprising dignity. By the second week, Cedar Ridge began transforming in subtle ways. Residents decorated porches without submitting sketches. Kids left chalk drawings on sidewalks. A nurse who worked nights parked in her driveway without receiving passive-aggressive emails. Mrs. Dalton rehung the memorial flag for her late husband in full view of the street. No one complained. Marcus noticed another shift too. People started talking to each other. Not the stiff HOA-approved greetings of before, but real conversations. They borrowed tools, shared contractor recommendations, helped move furniture, organized a weekend cleanup of the lake trail that Linda had once kept locked for goose management. Turns out there had never been a goose policy. There had only been Linda. One evening, while Marcus and Emma sanded rust from the truck bed, she asked the question she'd been holding since it all ended. "Why didn't you fight back sooner?" He kept sanding for a moment before answering. "Because some opponents need resistance. And others need room." She frowned. "Room to what?" "To overplay." He set the sander down. "In training, we learned that impatient people reveal themselves if nothing stops them. They mistake silence for weakness. They escalate. They get sloppy. Like billing the HOA to bully us." "Exactly." Emma considered that. So you were waiting the whole time? I was documenting the whole time. She grinned. That's colder. Marcus shrugged. Efficient. A few houses down, Greg attempted to reverse a trailer into his driveway and nearly removed his own mailbox. Half the street shouted conflicting instructions. Emma left. This neighborhood is chaos now. No, Marcus said, watching neighbors run over to help. Now it's normal. The special election was held 3 weeks later. Turnout was the highest Cedar Ridge had ever seen. The new board included Nancy, a retired accountant from the cul-de-sac, and somehow Greg, who campaigned on the slogan "Less drama, more drainage." He won comfortably. Linda did not attend. Rumors spread that she was selling her house. Others claimed she had moved in with a cousin 2 towns over. One dramatic version involved tax investigators and a pontoon boat. Marcus ignored all of it. The day the truck finally started, half the neighborhood was present. Emma turned the key. The engine coughed once, twice, then roared to life in a cloud of smoke and triumph. Cheers erupted across the driveway. Atlas barked wildly. Mrs. Dalton cried a little and denied it immediately. Marcus smiled, really smiled, for the first time since moving in. As the engine settled into a steady rumble, Emma looked down the now clear driveway toward the street where the barriers had once stood. She picked the wrong house, she said. Marcus shook his head. No, he replied, she picked the wrong neighborhood. Because once fear was gone, Cedar Ridge had done what Linda never expected. It remembered it was full of people.